Hey, Shavua Tov, Parashat Emor, to dance with all your strength. V'David mecharker b'chol oz. King David was dancing with all of his strength when the Ark of the Covenant returned to Jerusalem. This is something we all must do. As Jews, we love to talk about music. We're a very musical people. But dance is also important. And maybe there's room to even dance on the Sabbath. Not necessarily a physical dance, but more of a spiritual dance, because an essence of Judaism is to always be in motion. Judaism is against standing still. And we see this in a number of ways. In this week's parsha, we have the festivals. They are called in Hebrew Moadim. And the introduction says, these are the festivals of the Lord. So what are the festivals? Well, we would expect to hear right away about Pesach, about Sukkot, about Shavuot, Rosh Hashanah, and Yom Kippur. Those are the festivals, but no. The first day mentioned as a festival is the Shabbat, is the Sabbath. And the commentaries say, wait a second, the Shabbat is not a festival, it's the Sabbath, it's its own thing. So how come it's called a Moed, a festival? So the great Rabbi Yosef Dov Soloveitchik explains that the word Moed is mistranslated if you say it means festival. Rather it means an encounter, a meeting with God. And there are two types. There are meetings with God on the festivals which take place in His house, in the Beit HaMikdash. And then there are meetings with God which take place in our houses on the Sabbath. When the Sabbath Queen comes in, we are having an encounter with God. Well, if that's the case, then the Sabbath is no longer just a day to sit around and read the newspaper. It's an encounter with God. And indeed, the commentator, the Seforno, explains that when the festivals are given to us, we are instructed to proclaim them to be festivals. Tikru'u otam. They are mikra'e kodesh, days that are declared to be holy. In other words, we have to actively fill these days with holiness, not just passively refrain from doing forbidden labors, but sit around on the couch reading a newspaper or a nice novel. Rather, they must be days of spiritual growth. Now, this is a fundamental point of Judaism, to be in constant motion, to always be dancing with all of our strength. And perhaps it is best expressed in the counting of the Omer. The counting of the Omer is the subject of a controversy. When do we start counting the Omer? There are two ancient groups. One was called the Perushim, or the Pharisees, from whom we are descended. These are the rabbis of rabbinic Judaism, the authors of the Talmud. Then you had at the same time, back then in Second Temple days, the Sadducees, or the Tzaddukim. And they argued, when do you start counting the Omer? You see, the Torah says you count the day after the Shabbat. Well, what's the day after the Shabbat? The Tzaddukim say very simple. Sunday. You start counting on the first Sunday after Passover. And you count until the holiday of Shavuot. The Perushim say no. Shabbat doesn't mean Saturday. It means a day of rest. And the first day of Pesach is also a day of rest. You start counting from after the first day of Pesach, which is what we do, which is our practice. What exactly is this argument about? Who were these Perushim and who were these Tzaddukim? The Perushim, we know who they are. Their names show up in the Talmud. But who are the Tzaddukim? What did they represent? What is their reasoning in their argument? So first of all, the Tzaddukim, I wouldn't say reject, but they diminish the importance of an oral law. They follow the written law. And there was a beautiful commentary written by Rav Nachshoni, who explains that the argument was over what is the festival of Shavuot about. If you were to ask an average Jew, tell me what Shavuot is about, they would say to you, it's about receiving the Torah. Except that it doesn't say that in the Torah. We know it from our rabbinical tradition, from the oral law, as it were, but it is not written in the Torah. And the Sadducees say it's very simply an agricultural festival. And the counting of the Omer connects one agricultural landmark with another agricultural landmark. The bringing of the Omer offering during the holiday of Passover is barley, and then we achieve wheat with the two breads of the holiday of Shavuot. It's an agricultural festival, so therefore it's from the season of Passover until the season of Shavuot, and you don't have to be so precise about the exact day. When the Torah says the day after the Sabbath, it means the day after the Sabbath, Sunday. But the Perushim say, no. Shavuot is not about agriculture. This is about Torah. Torah is something which requires constant growth, and therefore we must count from Pesach to Shavuot from the day when we left Egypt, and therefore it's very critical to count from the day after the first day of Pesach, because that's how long it took us to get to Mount Sinai and receive the Torah on Shavuot, Zman Matan Toratenu. So the whole counting of the Omer shows the ever upward trajectory of the Jew who does not rest, who is in constant motion, is constantly dancing with all of his strength to grow and to welcome the encounter with God on the festivals. So therefore, the meaning for the Pharisees is quite clear. The meaning for the Sadducees is quite not clear. And so I think there is a historical mystery which is approached indirectly by a Mishnah in the Masechet Avot. And the mystery is, what happened to the Sadducees? Where are they? They don't exist today. They existed in the times of the Second Temple, and then, as soon as the temple was destroyed, the Sadducees ceased to be a factor in Jewish life. What happened there? So the rabbis tell us in the Mishnah that there are two types of arguments. One is an argument which is l'shem shamayim, for the sake of heaven. This is the argument of Hillel and Shammai, the great rabbinic scholars, whose disagreements echo through the ages and are still studied today in the pages of the Talmud. And then there is an argument which is not for the sake of Shamayim, and that type of an argument is one that will not persist, that will not endure. And what is an example of that argument? Korach and his congregation. Now, this is a strange juxtaposition. Hillel and Shammai were about a millennium after Korach and his cohorts and their rebellion. So why is the Mishnah combining them? I think it's teaching us something about the Tzaddukim, about the Sadducees. They were similar to Korach. Their ideology was similar to Korach. What did Korach believe? He believed that a Jew can achieve a certain level, and that's good enough. He can say, I have arrived. What did Korach say to Moses? Rav lachem, it's too much for you to be leaders. The entire congregation is holy, and God is in their midst. Why should you be leading the Jewish people? In other words, why you, Moses, should you continue to lead us and give us more Torah and more mitzvot? We are already holy. We can now enjoy life. As long as you live according to a basic standard, then the purpose of your life is to enjoy it. And therefore one has arrived. And for that reason, Korach represents the aristocratic classes who feel that status is a very important thing. Once you've achieved status, you have what it takes. And then you can look down at those that are beneath you. And that is the mindset of the Sadducees as well, who historically were the elites. They were in the Kohanim. Many of the Kohanim were Sadducees, so much so that on Yom Kippur, the rabbis had to make sure that the high priest wasn't going to follow the Sadducee idea of how to bring the incense in the temple. And that was considered a major concern. They were the elites. They didn't want to mingle with the lower classes, and they felt that they had status. And status is important in their eyes. However, status is not important in Judaism's eyes. Who was the greatest leader we ever had? Moses. Who was the most humble person we ever had? Moses. And perhaps that humility was key to Moses being able to talk to God at any time that he wished, something that no other prophet ever achieved. We'll get into that perhaps in just a couple of moments. But first I want to talk about King David, because this brings into stark focus this exact contrast between those who feel that status is a thing and those who feel that the role of the Jew is to be constantly in motion, constantly growing, and there is no such thing as achieving any level of status. King David saw that the Holy Ark was coming to Jerusalem, and he danced with all of his strength with the simple folk in the street. And he was doing a wild performance, so filled with joy was he, at the arrival of the Holy Ark, and his wife, Michal, the daughter of King Saul, was watching this spectacle from her window. And she was not pleased with what she saw. She despised David in her heart when she saw him, and when he came home, she says to him, "What an honorable and great day this was, when the king of Israel has revealed himself to the lowly maidservants of the people." Apparently during David's dancing, maybe some parts of his body were showing. And so she was critical of him for this. And he says to her in response, "With those people I will become honored." In other words, for Michal, the daughter of Shaul, status was everything. You're the king, your status should prevent you from associating with those lower class people. And David said, nothing doing. That is where the true honor lies. What was he trying to say? And by the way, Michal, the daughter of Shaul, as a punishment for this, never had any children. In other words, she, like the Sadducees and like Korach, disappeared from the face of the earth. The mindset that says that a person can achieve a certain level and then they have arrived and they can be no longer striving. If you don't strive, then you disappear. That's the moral of this story. But what was King David doing with those people? How come with the lower class people is where he finds his honor? Because if you don't have humility, then you can never grow. A person who is humble says, "I haven't achieved what I can achieve." And King David, I think, more than any other person, was somebody who not only associated with these simple people, but he listened to them. He heard them, and that was what enabled him to write the Psalms, a most miraculous work, which every Jew in any generation reads and feels as if these words could come straight out of their own heart. King David, who wrote them, understood the feelings of every Jew because he listened to them, because that's where he learned about what people need in order to grow and to be complete. Because Judaism is about dancing with all of your strength. It's about constantly being in motion. It's about rejoicing in the encounters we have with God when he comes into our homes on the Sabbath or at any moment. And take this to Moses and it becomes on an entirely different level. Because Moses was the most humble, he was constantly listening. And God is speaking all the time. There are lots of statements by the rabbis about a voice coming out from Mount Sinai. Indeed, the tent of meeting, Ohel Moed, there's that word again, encounter, is a place where God would midaber. Midaber with the chirik means he was speaking himself, speaking to himself. Mitdaber, he was speaking to himself. In other words, God is constantly speaking. But only a Moses knows how to listen and to hear it at all times. And perhaps that's why his prophecy was greater, because he was the most humble, but he was the most attentive. And that is what Judaism is all about. The counting of the Omer is not just a celebration of material success, and then one can sit back and enjoy that success, as the Sadducees say, but rather it is a symbol of the constant growth and motion of the Jew who is constantly spiritually dancing and does not stand still for a single moment. And if we do that, and when the encounter with God moves us to dance in that manner, then we will have even more deep connections to God. And may the fact that we have these weekly encounters with God enable us to have the other kind, the other meetings with God in his house, in the rebuilt temple of God on the Temple Mount in Jerusalem. May there be peace, and may this glorious day come soon. Shavua Tov.